Let's look at the reservoirs of the world in the 20th century with this Gapminder software. You see a number of circles. Each circle is a country. The bigger the circle, the bigger the country. The colors refer to parts of the world. And on the y-axis, you see the amount of storage in million cubic meters. And at the x-axis, you see the population. And we start in 1900. And let's just see what happens over the course of the century. In the beginning, not much is happening. Especially in terms of reservoirs, but then we see something moving. Countries are moving. And this is where we are at the end of the century. And we basically see that most countries huddle in this corner, but that there are 6 different countries when it comes to storage and population. One is, for example, India, a lot of people, not so much storage, however. Another one is Brazil, that is really coming up in terms of storage. But another one that's interesting is Canada. A lot of storage, not so many people. But the 3 main countries that are important for the 20th century, of course, are the USSR, the United States, and China. And let's look a little bit more at what they did in the last century. We go back to, let's say, the early 1930s. We see that in the 30s, as part of the New Deal, the United States starts building reservoirs, continued during the Second World War, and then actually in the 1970s starts to sort of level off. If we go back in a little bit more detail and look, for example, when exactly everything starts, we see that during the Second World War, the United States built a lot of reservoirs still, and that only after the Second World War, the USSR starts to catch up, and they continue to build dams at an extremely high rate until about 1990 when the wall collapses and the USSR falls apart. You see that in the United States already earlier, maybe early 70s, they start to stop building the reservoirs there, maybe out of environmental considerations, maybe because all the good places were taken. But in any case, after 1970, there's not much going on anymore. When we look at China, we see an interesting pattern as well. We see sort of 2 jumps. The first one is the big jump forward, which in many ways was a big jump backward because 10 million people lost their lives. And at the same time, there was a lot of forced industrialization, which caused this huge jump in the reservoirs built during that time. Then we see a sort of a normal development in China until, again, the 90s, when China starts really developing, and we see an acceleration again in the number of reservoirs being built. So you see, in a way, the whole history of the 20th century reflected in reservoir construction around the world. Now, it's interesting for history, but can we also do something for water management? Well, let's see what happens, for example, if you put area on the x-axis. And you see that, well, maybe these countries sort of fall on a bit on a line. Maybe there is sort of like a linear correlation between how big a country is and how much storage they have, which would not be unsurprising. And there's one country that clearly falls under this line, and that's Australia, which also makes sense because although Australia is a large country, most of it is desert, and you would not build reservoirs there. In order to see better if there is indeed a good correlation between the size of a country and the amount of storage, we can also directly plot storage per area for these different countries just to see if they would fall in one line. And well, maybe, but you see that there's actually 2 outliers here. There's Uganda and Ghana, who are not so big as a country, but they have huge reservoirs. So these outliers sort of skew the scale, if you want. If we make this a log scale, that we see that, and you do see that indeed, more or less, when you're a country that is diverse, you can expect to have about 10 centimeters of storage. Now, that makes it, of course, also very interesting to see where are there no reservoirs yet. And then we go to countries like Algeria or Libya, well, or Saudi Arabia. Well, these are all desert countries, so that makes it a little bit difficult to see. But if we change the color maybe to the rainfall, so we get some idea about if it's a very dry country or not, we get to see some countries that are not dry and they still do not have a lot of reservoirs. For example, the Congo. The Congo can supply all of Africa twice with the electricity needed just by its hydropower potential, but also a country like Papua New Guinea, for example, obvious with the mountains and a lot of water, has almost no reservoirs yet and will have them soon. Myanmar, only 3 millimeters. I'm pretty sure they will go very high because it's also a very water-rich country, and the same holds for a country like Colombia. They will all move up to 10 centimeters or well above that. If we assume that for non-desert countries there will be on average 10 centimeters of storage, we can say that by now about 60% of all the dams that will ever be built have been built, and that we will build probably another 40% of the total reservoirs that will be built eventually in the world.